The strong scent of hay and leather mixed with the warm air inside the stable as Zeke Holloway held the reins tightly. The chestnut stallion, with intelligent eyes and a powerful stance, snorted impatiently, sensing his owner's tension. Stormborn, or just Storm, as Zeke called him, wasn't just a horse. He was a companion, a silent gamble against a world that insisted on looking down on him. "There he is again, talking to that damn nag." Merritt Calloway, the ranch foreman, chuckled, crossing his muscular arms as he leaned against the stable doorway. A few ranch hands gathered around him, their laughter bouncing off the wooden beams. Ellis Crowley, one of the meanest among them, pointed at Storm with a sneer. "If that horse ever wins a race, I swear I'll eat my hat," Ellis mocked, drawing another round of laughter from the men. Zeke kept his gaze low, his fists clenching at his sides. He had heard these taunts so many times he'd lost count. But he was never a man of empty words. He was a man of action. And one day, these same men would have to swallow every bit of venom they spewed at him and Storm. "Come on, Holloway, make that thing run. Or is he as slow as you?" Merritt pressed, his eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. Zeke didn't respond. He simply ran a hand gently over Storm's neck and, with one last quiet glance at the men around him, led the horse back into his stall. He had nothing to prove to them today. But time would take care of putting everyone in their rightful place. The sun hung low over the vast fields of Holbrook Ranch, casting long golden shadows across the paddocks. The air smelled of dust and sweat, the unmistakable scent of hard labor that never truly left a man's skin. Ezekiel Zeke Holloway stood near the fence, watching Storm trot gracefully inside the training corral. The horse moved like a ghost over the dirt, each stride strong and confident. He was ready. But no one else saw it. Behind him, voices murmured. Merritt Calloway and Ellis Crowley stood with their arms crossed, smirking. Other ranch hands gathered, eager to witness yet another humiliation. Zeke ignored them. He had learned long ago that words meant nothing on their own. Storm would do the talking. Just as Zeke was about to climb into the saddle, a voice rang out from the barn doors. "Holloway." Zeke turned to see Benedict Holbrook, the ranch owner, walking toward him with slow, deliberate steps. Holbrook was a man of wealth and power, someone who had never spent a day struggling the way Zeke had. His eyes were cold, calculating, and at that moment, filled with nothing but disdain. "I've had enough of this nonsense, Holloway," Holbrook said, his tone final. "I don't pay you to waste time on a worthless animal. You've been playing cowboy with this damn horse for too long, and I won't have it anymore." Zeke's jaw tightened. He had given everything to this ranch, his time, his sweat, his loyalty. And now, just like that, he was being tossed aside. "You and that horse are done here," Holbrook continued, waving his hand dismissively. "Pack your things. Get off my land." Laughter erupted from the men behind him. Merritt grinned, tipping his hat mockingly, while Ellis let out a long, exaggerated whistle. "Guess you finally got what was coming to you, Holloway," Ellis sneered. Zeke didn't react. He wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Without a word, he turned back to Storm, running a hand down the horse's neck, feeling the familiar strength beneath his fingers. This wasn't the end. With the sun sinking below the horizon, Zeke took one last look at the ranch he had called home for years. He mounted Storm, his heart heavy but his resolve unshaken. As he rode away, the echoes of their laughter followed him, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. One day he would return, and when he did, everything would be different. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and dry grass as Ezekiel Zeke Holloway urged Storm forward. The powerful stallion moved with steady confidence, its muscles rippling beneath the moonlight. Behind them, Holbrook Ranch faded into the distance, swallowed by darkness. The place that had been his home for years, the land where he had poured his sweat and strength, was now nothing more than a painful memory. But as much as the betrayal burned, Zeke refused to look back. The laughter of the ranch hands still echoed in his mind, a haunting reminder of the humiliation he had endured. They had mocked him, cast him aside like he was nothing. And yet, deep inside, he knew something they didn't. He wasn't done. They might have taken his job, stripped him of his dignity, but they hadn't taken his will to fight. One day they would see. One day they would regret it all. Hours passed as Zeke rode beneath the vast, starlit sky. The loneliness of the open plains was both liberating and suffocating. He had spent so long within the confines of Holbrook Ranch that he had forgotten what it felt like to be free. Free of orders, free of insults, free of the weight of other men's expectations. But freedom came with a price. He had no money, no food, and nowhere to go. All he had was Storm, the only soul in this world that had never doubted him. By the time the first light of dawn painted the horizon in hues of pink and gold, exhaustion had settled deep into his bones. The road stretched endlessly ahead, leading to nowhere in particular, but fate had its own plans. As they crested a small hill, a town appeared in the distance, a modest place nestled between the rolling plains, its buildings worn by time but standing firm. A wooden sign by the dirt path read, "Bridger's Hollow, population 843. Zeke pulled Storm to a slow trot as they approached the town limits. The streets were quiet at this early hour, save for a few workers setting up their market stalls and a couple of farmhands unloading crates from a wagon. This wasn't a place of wealth or power. It was a town of survivors. People who worked hard, fought harder, and took pride in every meal they put on their tables. Maybe this was exactly what he needed. At the far end of the main street, a weathered livery stable stood with its doors half open. The smell of hay and manure drifted from inside, familiar and oddly comforting. Sitting outside on a rocking chair was an older man, his face carved by years of sun and hardship. His sharp blue eyes settled on Zeke as he dismounted. "Ain't seen you around before," the man said, chewing on a toothpick. His voice was rough, worn from years of barking orders and working long days. Zeke patted Storm's neck before stepping forward. For the first time in years, he wasn't answering to Holbrook, wasn't standing in the shadow of men who thought themselves better than him. This was his chance to start fresh. "I know horses," he said simply, his voice steady. The old man leaned back, studying him for a long moment before nodding toward the stable. "Then prove it." Zeke didn't hesitate. He had spent years proving himself to men who never cared. This time, he would prove himself to a man who might actually give him a chance. And maybe, just maybe, this was the first step toward something bigger. Because deep down, no matter how far he had fallen, Zeke knew one thing for certain. His story wasn't over yet. The scent of old hay, leather, and sweat filled the air inside the Bridger's Hollow livery stable, a smell Ezekiel Zeke Holloway knew all too well. He had spent his life working in places just like this, long hours, hard labor, and little to no thanks for the effort. But here, in this town where no one knew his past, he had a chance to rebuild himself from the ground up. The old man, Silas Boone, was still watching him from his rocking chair, one boot lazily propped against the stable post. He squinted against the morning light, sizing Zeke up like a horse at auction. "You say you know horses. Let's see if you know work, too," Silas finally grumbled, pushing himself up with a grunt. His body was slow, but his mind was sharp, and Zeke could tell this man didn't tolerate fools. Without another word, Silas tossed him a pitchfork. Zeke caught it midair, his grip firm, his expression unreadable. Stalls need mucking, water troughs need filling, and there's a mare in the back limping on her left foreleg. If you're worth anything, you'll figure it out. It wasn't an invitation. It was a challenge. Zeke didn't hesitate. He set to work, his body moving with the efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. His muscles ached from the long ride, but he didn't let it slow him down. He hauled buckets of water, shoveled manure, and checked over the mare, running his calloused hands down her leg, feeling for heat and swelling. Silas watched from the shadows, his sharp blue eyes narrowing in thought. He had seen plenty of drifters pass through town, men looking for work just long enough to earn a meal before moving on. But this one was different. There was a weight to him, a quiet storm brewing beneath the surface. By midday, Zeke had done twice the work expected. When he finally stopped to wipe the sweat from his brow, Silas was waiting with a tin cup in hand. "Drink. You earned it." Zeke took the cup, the cool water a relief against the dryness in his throat. "You work like a man with something to prove," Silas observed. Zeke met his gaze. He didn't owe this man his story. But he also didn't feel the need to lie. "Maybe I do." Silas grunted in approval. "Then you start tomorrow. Pay ain't much, but it's honest." Zeke gave a single nod. He wasn't looking for riches. He was looking for a way forward. And now, he had one. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he stood beside Storm, running a hand down the stallion's strong neck. The road ahead was long, but this was the first step. One day, he would return to Holbrook Ranch. Not as a broken man, but as the man they never saw coming. The days at Bridger's Hollow livery stable turned into weeks, and Ezekiel Zeke Holloway fell into the rhythm of hard labor. He was up before dawn, working until his muscles ached and the sun dipped below the horizon. The scent of sweat, horsehair, and earth clung to him, but he welcomed it. It reminded him he was still moving forward. Unlike at Holbrook Ranch, no one looked down on him here. There were no sneering faces, no mocking voices. But even in the silence of the stable, their laughter still haunted him. Each time he ran his hands down Storm's powerful frame, he remembered Merritt Calloway's cruel smirk, Ellis Crowley's jeers, and, most of all, Benedict Holbrook's cold, dismissive words. The anger sat inside him like hot coal, burning slow and deep. It wasn't revenge he wanted, it was proof. Proof that he was worth more than they had ever given him credit for. One evening, as he was brushing Storm down, a voice pulled him from his thoughts. "You thinking about ghosts, son?" Zeke turned to see Silas Boone, the livery owner, watching him from the stable doorway, chewing absently on a sprig of grass. The old man's weathered face gave little away, but his sharp blue eyes missed nothing. Zeke hesitated before answering, his fingers still running over Storm's coat. "Not ghosts. Just unfinished business." Silas grunted, stepping forward. He studied Zeke for a moment before speaking. "I've seen men chew on revenge like a piece of tough meat. Some swallow it and let it strengthen them. Others choke on it. Which kind are you?" Zeke didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out toward the darkening horizon. He wasn't after revenge. He didn't need to make them suffer. He just needed to make them see. "I don't want revenge. I want respect." Silas let out a dry chuckle and leaned against the wooden post. "Then you better be ready to take it. 'Cause no man hands it over for free." That night, long after the stable lights were out, Zeke sat beside Storm, staring up at the stars. He ran a calloused hand along the stallion's muscular neck, his jaw tightening with quiet determination. "They didn't believe in you, boy. Just like they didn't believe in me." Storm let out a slow, steady breath, his warmth grounding Zeke in the moment. "But we'll show 'em. One day." And when that day came, Holbrook Ranch would never forget his name. The morning air was sharp and cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and fresh hay as Ezekiel Zeke Holloway stepped out of the stable. The first rays of sunlight painted the sky in soft hues of orange and pink, stretching long shadows across Bridger's Hollow. He pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders, though the chill wasn't what kept him awake at night. His mind was too busy shaping a future he refused to let slip away. He had spent weeks proving his worth at the livery, working harder than anyone, but deep inside, he knew that wasn't enough. Surviving wasn't the same as winning. and Zeke had no intention of just surviving. Beside him, Storm stood tall, his muscles shifting beneath a sleek chestnut coat that gleamed in the early light. The stallion tossed his head slightly, sensing Zeke's energy. There was something about this horse, something the fools at Holbrook Ranch had failed to see. They had called him worthless, but Zeke knew better. Storm wasn't just strong. He was fast, smart, and carried a fire in his heart that matched Zeke's own. If trained right, he could become the kind of horse that won races, earned money, and turned heads. And that was exactly what Zeke needed. Money meant independence. Money meant land. Money meant a seat at the table that Holbrook and his men had tried to deny him. But it wouldn't come easy. Racing required more than just speed. It took connections, entry fees, and the right opportunities. He needed to start small, prove Storm's worth one step at a time. There was a circuit of local races scattered across the region, informal but competitive, where men bet on their horses with everything they had. If he could dominate those, people would start paying attention. And once they did, there would be no turning back. A movement in the corner of his vision caught his attention. Silas Boone stood at the stable doors, watching him with a familiar, knowing look. The old man didn't talk much in the mornings, but his eyes missed nothing. Zeke had the feeling Silas had seen men like him before, men with too much fire in their gut to stay in one place for long. "You look like a man with a plan," Silas said, his voice rough with age but steady as ever. Zeke exhaled slowly, giving Storm's mane a final stroke before turning to meet Silas's gaze. He had a plan, all right. One that would take him far beyond Bridger's Hollow, far beyond the life he had once known. "I am," Zeke said, his voice quieter than usual, but filled with a certainty he hadn't felt in years. Silas nodded, his weathered face unreadable. He didn't ask for details, didn't pry into Zeke's ambitions. He just studied him for a moment before giving the smallest smirk. "Then let's see if you've got the guts to follow through." The challenge sat between them like an unspoken agreement. Zeke didn't answer, but he didn't have to. He had already made his choice. Storm wasn't just a horse, and this wasn't just about winning races. This was about reclaiming everything they had taken from him. The men at Holbrook Ranch had made a mistake the day they threw him out. Now, he was going to make sure they never forgot his name. The dusty road leading out of Bridger's Hollow stretched endlessly before Ezekiel Zeke Holloway, bathed in the golden glow of late afternoon. Every hoofbeat beneath him sent a pulse of determination through his veins. Storm moved effortlessly, his powerful muscles rippling beneath his sleek coat, his ears pricked forward as if he, too, could sense what was coming. This was the beginning of something bigger. Zeke had spent weeks preparing, training Storm in the quiet fields outside town, testing his speed, his endurance, his ability to read a rider's command before it was even given. The stallion was fast, faster than any man at Holbrook Ranch had ever imagined. And now, it was time to prove it. Word had spread about a race being held on the outskirts of Redwood Crossing, a rough little town 2 days' ride west. Small stakes, but enough to get noticed. It was the perfect place to start. By the time Zeke arrived, the town was buzzing with energy. A long, makeshift racetrack had been cleared along the dry riverbed, and men gathered around, placing bets, eyeing each other's horses with a mixture of admiration and suspicion. This wasn't some fancy competition with silk-clad jockeys and polished thoroughbreds. This was a race for men who had something to prove. Ranch hands, drifters, gamblers, all looking for a chance to win big or lose everything. Zeke dismounted near the corral where the other riders were preparing. Some were adjusting saddles, others whispering reassurances to their horses. A few cast sideways glances at him, an unfamiliar face, a new challenger. That suited him just fine. He wasn't here to make friends. "You here to race, stranger?" Zeke turned to find a thick-set man watching him with narrowed eyes, a cigar clenched between his teeth. Caleb Dunn, the man running the event. Zeke had heard of him, a former rancher turned businessman, known for organizing races where the law didn't always reach. "That depends," Zeke said evenly, patting Storm's neck. "You taking real riders, or just men looking to throw their money away?" A slow grin spread across Caleb's face, revealing yellowed teeth. He liked confidence. "Entries $10. Winner takes all." Zeke reached into his coat and pulled out the money. It was nearly everything he had, but he wasn't leaving without more. As he tightened Storm's girth, a voice behind him scoffed. "You sure you want to waste that money, cowboy?" Zeke didn't have to turn to know the type. One of those men who talked big before a race and talked bigger after, unless he lost. He finally glanced over his shoulder, meeting the cocky smirk of a younger rider with a lean, wiry build. Malcolm Tate. The locals were already whispering about him, one of the fastest riders in the region, and by the looks of it, he knew it. "You worried, Tate?" Zeke asked, adjusting Storm's reins. Malcolm chuckled, shaking his head. "Just don't want you crying when that fancy horse of yours eats my dust." Zeke didn't flinch, didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he climbed into the saddle, settling into position. Storm shifted beneath him, muscles coiled like a loaded spring. Caleb stepped forward, raising a pistol into the air. The crowd quieted, boots scuffing against the dry earth as men leaned forward in anticipation. Zeke tightened his grip on the reins. "Riders ready." Storm's ears flicked forward. He was ready. The gunshot cracked through the air. And they were off. The crack of the gunshot split the air, and Ezekiel Zeke Holloway barely had time to breathe before Storm launched forward like a bullet. The world blurred around him, the dust, the shouts, the pounding of hooves, all of it fading into raw instinct. The stallion's powerful muscles coiled and released beneath him, every stride eating up the dry earth with a hunger that mirrored Zeke's own determination. This wasn't just about winning. This was about proving to himself, to the crowd, and to the ghosts of Holbrook Ranch, that he was more than they had ever believed. To his right, Malcolm Tate pushed forward, his black mare Raven moving like liquid shadow beside them. Zeke could feel Tate's eyes on him, the tension thick between them. Tate wasn't just another racer. He was the man to beat, the one everyone had bet their money on. He had the confidence of someone who had never lost, and that made him dangerous. But Zeke had something Tate didn't, a hunger deeper than pride. The first bend in the track approached, a sharp, treacherous turn where riders either proved their skill or lost everything. Most men would pull back, playing it safe. But Zeke wasn't most men. He shifted his weight, whispering a command only Storm would understand. The stallion didn't hesitate. He lowered his head, tightened his stride, and cut the turn tighter than anyone else dared. The ground beneath them felt unstable, but Zeke trusted his horse. 4 years, they had been underestimated. Now, they were rewriting the story. As they came out of the curve, Zeke saw the flicker of doubt cross Tate's face. Raven was fast, but she had lost ground. Storm had seized the lead, and the finish line was coming into sight. The roar of the crowd grew louder, boots stomping against the dry earth, voices raised in excitement and disbelief. Zeke knew this was the moment that would mark his return to the world as a man to be reckoned with. Tate gave one final push, urging Raven forward, but it was too late. Storm found another burst of speed, stretching into the wind, as if he had been waiting his whole life for this moment. In the final stretch, there was no doubt, no hesitation, only victory. They crossed the finish line first. Zeke barely registered the cheers as he pulled Storm to a stop. His heart pounded, but not from exhaustion. This was only the beginning. He had come here a nobody, just another rider in the dirt. Now, he was the man who had beaten Malcolm Tate. And soon, he would be the man who rode back into Holbrook Ranch, not as a forgotten stable hand, but as someone they would never ignore again. The dust had barely settled when Ezekiel Zeke Holloway swung off Storm, his boots hitting the dry earth with a solid thud. The weight of what he had just done pressed against his chest, but it wasn't fear, it was triumph. Around him, the crowd erupted in cheers and murmurs of disbelief. No one had expected the unknown rider to win, least of all Malcolm Tate. Yet here he was, standing beside the fastest horse on the track, his name now on the lips of every man who had placed a bet that day. Malcolm Tate rode up alongside him, his expression unreadable beneath the sweat and dust streaking his face. He dismounted with practiced ease, running a hand down Raven's neck before turning to face Zeke. For the first time, there was no arrogance in his stance, just quiet acknowledgement. "Damn fine race, Holloway," Tate said, adjusting his hat. The bitterness in his voice was there, but so was something else, respect. Zeke simply nodded, his gaze steady. He didn't need to gloat. The victory spoke for itself. But before he could respond, Caleb Dunn, the man running the race, stepped forward, a leather pouch of winnings in his hands. His grin was wide, but his eyes were calculating. Men like Caleb were always watching, always weighing their options. "You just cost a lot of folks a lot of money, Holloway," Caleb said, tossing the pouch toward him. Zeke caught it easily, the weight of the coins heavy in his palm. More money than he had seen in years. "That my problem?" Zeke asked coolly. Caleb chuckled, lighting a cigar and exhaling a slow stream of smoke. "Not at all. In fact, I think it's about time we had a real conversation." Zeke tensed. He knew what was coming. Men like Caleb didn't just run races for sport, they ran them for profit. And when they found a rider who could win, they made sure to keep him close. "There's another race next month, bigger purse, bigger stakes," Caleb continued, eyes gleaming. "I got men looking for horses that can win, and you just put yourself on their radar. Stick around, and you could make real money." Zeke felt the weight of the offer. This was what he had wanted, wasn't it? A way to build himself up, to carve a name out of nothing. But as he glanced at Storm, something inside him twisted. This wasn't just about winning races. This was about Holbrook Ranch. About the men who had laughed at him, who had thrown him away like he was nothing. About the land he had worked, the pride they had stripped from him. He hadn't come this far just to be another rider chasing money. "Appreciate the offer, Dunn," Zeke said, tightening his grip on Storm's reins. "But I got other plans." The older man exhaled another puff of smoke, shaking his head with a knowing smirk. "Suit yourself, Holloway. Just don't be surprised when folks start looking for you." Zeke didn't answer. He swung into the saddle, feeling Storm shift beneath him, still strong, still ready. He had made his choice. He was going home. The sun was setting behind the rolling hills as Ezekiel Zeke Holloway rode toward Holbrook Ranch. The sky burned with deep oranges and purples, casting long shadows over the land he had once called home. But this wasn't the same ride he had taken years ago. He wasn't some humiliated stable hand being sent away with nothing but a horse and the weight of ridicule on his back. This time, he was returning as a man who had carved his own name into the world. Storm moved like he knew what this meant, his stride steady, his breath controlled. The stallion had been called worthless once, just like Zeke. Now, they were both proof that no man had the right to decide another's worth. With every mile closer, memories clawed their way to the surface. The mocking laughter of Merritt Calloway, the sneers of Ellis Crowley, and the cold indifference of Benedict Holbrook. They had underestimated him. They had thought he'd fade into nothing. They were wrong. As he reached the outer fence line, the ranch came into view, just as it had always stood, strong, sprawling, a symbol of power and pride. But now, something was different. He wasn't looking at it as a worker. He was looking at it as a man who could take it. The first person to spot him was Merritt, still as thick-necked and arrogant as ever. He was leaning against the barn when his eyes landed on Zeke, and the moment of recognition was immediate. His smirk faltered, his posture stiffening. Zeke pulled Storm to a stop just outside the corral, letting the dust settle before speaking. "Something wrong, Calloway? You look like you've seen a ghost." Merritt pushed off the barn, straightening his hat, trying to recover. "Didn't expect to see you back, Holloway," he said, eyeing Storm with something that almost resembled worry. "Good. Let him wonder. Let them all wonder." "Didn't expect to come back like this, either," Zeke admitted. "But here I am." By now, others had started to gather. Ellis Crowley, looking as smug as ever, but quieter this time. Ranch hands whispering among themselves, trying to piece together how the man they had dismissed so easily was now returning with his head high, his horse strong, his presence commanding. Then, the last figure stepped out onto the porch, Benedict Holbrook himself, the man who had sent him away. Their eyes met across the distance, and for the first time, Zeke saw something he had never seen in Holbrook before. Not fear, not regret, but recognition. Zeke exhaled slowly, his grip on Storm's reins loosening. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. They already knew. He turned his gaze back to the land, the fields, the barns, the house that had once seemed untouchable. Not anymore. "I came back to make an offer, Holbrook," Zeke said, his voice calm, steady. "Because one way or another, this ranch is going to have my name on it." And for the first time in his life, Holbrook had no smart remark to give. Because deep down, he knew it too.